There are truths so dark, so deeply buried, that even whispers of them feel like a risk. This story isn't about ghosts or cryptids. It's about something real. It's about power. The kind that wears a perfect smile, hides behind mansion walls, and holds the world in its grip. The kind that has secrets, twisted, unspoken truths no one dares confront. What you're about to hear is not for the faint of heart. This is what happened when I accepted an invitation to one of Oprah's exclusive parties and uncovered a darkness that is truly unseen. I received the invitation on a rainy Thursday, slipped between the pages of my morning newspaper like a secret. Thick, cream-colored cardstock, the edges embossed with a subtle gold trim that caught the weak morning light. My name, handwritten in careful flowing script, felt out of place amid the usual junk mail and coffee-stained bills. You are cordially invited to a private gathering at the estate of Ms. Oprah Winfrey. Transportation will be arranged. Dress accordingly. There was no return address, just a small ornate crest stamped in black wax, a symbol I didn't recognize, but somehow felt familiar, like a dream slipping away upon waking. My hands felt oddly cold as I held the card, the fine paper absorbing the slight tremor in my fingers. I knew it had to be from my boss. He was the only person in my life connected enough to score an invitation to one of these mythic parties, whispered about in closed-door conversations and half-drunken confessions. I'd heard the stories, how the rich and powerful gathered in shadowed mansions to make their twisted deals, to laugh behind the backs of the people who worshiped them. I should have tossed it in the trash, chalked it up to another one of his cryptic power plays, but I didn't. I told myself it was curiosity, but deep down, I knew it was something darker. A need to see for myself if the whispers were true. To peel back the velvet curtain and glimpse the world where the elites truly thrived. 2 days later, a black SUV arrived at my apartment just as the sun dipped below the skyline, casting long, crooked shadows across the rain-soaked streets. The driver, a stone-faced man in a tailored suit, merely nodded as I slid into the cool leather seat. He said nothing as we pulled away, the city lights smearing across the tinted windows like smudges of neon paint. As we left the familiar chaos of downtown behind, the buildings grew taller, sharper, their mirrored surfaces reflecting the dim glow of the setting sun. I felt a slow, creeping dread nestle into my chest as the streets turned from cracked pavement to smooth, freshly laid asphalt. The ride took nearly 2 hours, the world outside the windows shifting from concrete and steel to lush, sprawling estates with manicured lawns and towering iron gates. We passed fewer and fewer cars, the streetlights becoming rarer until we were driving through total darkness, the only light coming from our own headlights cutting through the mist. Finally, the SUV slowed, its tires crunching over gravel as we approached an enormous wrought iron gate. Beyond it, the shadowed outline of a mansion loomed, its pointed gables and stone turrets barely visible in the foggy gloom. The gates creaked open, and we rolled forward, the heavy, foreboding clank of metal slamming shut behind us. I had crossed a line, and deep down, I knew there was no coming back. The SUV crept up the gravel drive, its tires crunching against the loose stones with a steady, menacing rhythm. The mansion rose from the fog like a castle from a nightmare, all jagged peaks and dark, looming spires. Its towering stone walls seemed to pulse with a life of their own, the windows mere blackened slits against the pale facade, like unblinking eyes. We came to a stop beneath a massive stone archway, the shadows so deep I could barely make out the uniformed figures moving in the gloom. The driver stepped out without a word, his polished shoes echoing against the damp stone as he circled around to open my door. I hesitated for a moment, my heart a heavy, anxious drum in my chest, before stepping out into the thick, cool air. Immediately, 2 guards flanked me, their faces obscured by the brims of their black caps, shadows clinging to their sharp jawlines like dark whispers. One reached for my phone, his gloved hand extended with the silent, practiced precision of someone used to being obeyed. I hesitated, my thumb still resting on the smooth glass screen. "Phones are not permitted beyond this point, sir," the second guard intoned, his voice flat and mechanical, like the low hum of an engine. Reluctantly, I handed it over, the guard's gloved fingers closing around it with a finality that felt disturbingly permanent. Without a word, he slipped it into a small, lead-lined pouch, sealing it with a sharp, metallic click before sliding it into a black lockbox. A third figure stepped forward, a woman in a sleek, tailored black suit, her hair pulled into a severe, no-nonsense bun. She scanned me with a handheld metal detector, the device crackling and sparking slightly as it passed over my body, its cold, blinking eye tracing my outline. "Arms out," she commanded, and I complied, feeling my pulse thrum against my ribcage as the detector passed over my chest, my pockets, my shoes. Satisfied, she stepped back, her eyes narrowing slightly as if she were already memorizing my face, committing my features to some internal database. "Enjoy the party," she said, though her tone made it sound more like a warning than a welcome. The guard stepped aside, and the heavy oak doors behind them creaked open, the sound deep and groaning, like a beast slowly waking from a long, dreamless sleep. Warm, flickering candlelight spilled out into the cool night air, casting long, dancing shadows against the stone. I took a slow, steadying breath and stepped inside, the doors thundering shut behind me, sealing me in with the darkness. The interior of the mansion was a sharp contrast to the cold, oppressive stone outside. Gilded chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, their crystals casting fractured, ghostly rainbows across the polished marble floors. The air was thick with the mingling scents of burning incense and polished wood, each breath I took carrying a hint of something sharp, like the metallic tang of blood. Guests in tailored suits and shimmering gowns drifted through the vast, echoing halls, their whispers curling around the massive stone columns like smoke. Their eyes were bright yet hollow, flicking from shadow to shadow, as if searching for something just out of reach. Conversations cut off abruptly as I passed, the murmurs picking up again the moment I stepped out of earshot. I felt their eyes on me, assessing, measuring, deciding. A server glided up to me, his face a blank, unreadable mask. He extended a silver tray lined with tall, crystalline glasses filled with a swirling, brightly colored liquid that shimmered under the flickering candlelight. The drink glowed a vivid, unnatural blue, tiny bubbles spiraling up the sides like trapped whispers. "Drink, sir?" he asked, his voice flat, his eyes fixed on a point just over my shoulder, as if avoiding direct contact. I reached for a glass, my fingers trembling slightly as they closed around the cool, smooth crystal. I pretended to take a sip, letting the liquid brush my lips before pulling the glass away, my pulse thrumming in my ears. The server lingered a moment longer, his head tilting slightly as if he sensed my hesitation, before drifting back into the crowd. I glanced around, watching as other guests took long, deliberate pulls from their glasses, their eyes glazing over, their bodies swaying in subtle, synchronized movements. A woman in a deep crimson gown brushed past me, her pupils dilated, her lips curled into a soft, dreamy smile as she took another sip, her eyes unfocused and distant. Another guest, a tall, broad-shouldered man in a black suit, stared at his glass for a long moment before tilting his head back and draining it in one fluid motion. I watched his face change, the light behind his eyes dimming, his shoulders slackening as if an invisible weight had just settled onto his frame. His head turned slowly, his eyes locking onto mine for a brief, uncomfortable moment, his gaze empty, almost pleading, before he melted back into the crowd. As I moved deeper into the mansion, I noticed the same pattern repeating itself over and over. Each guest who drank seemed to slip further into themselves, their eyes losing focus, their movements becoming slow, almost mechanical. I tightened my grip on the glass, my knuckles white against the cut crystal. I still hadn't taken a real sip, and I was beginning to understand why. I needed air. The thick, perfumed fog of the mansion was closing in, pressing against my skin like damp velvet, each breath tasting of polished wood and old smoke. I slipped through the clusters of murmuring guests, ducking past towering marble pillars and gilded statues, until I found a small side door partially hidden behind a heavy velvet curtain. The door led to a narrow stone corridor, the sound of my footsteps echoing sharply against the cold walls as I followed the dim, flickering light toward a distant, warped glass door. My hand trembled slightly as I pushed it open, the chill of the night air wrapping around me like a cold, damp shroud. The garden outside was a twisted labyrinth of manicured hedges and towering stone statues, their faces locked in frozen, agonized expressions. The fog clung to the ground, swirling around my ankles as I stumbled forward, my heart still racing from the strange, detached stares of the guests inside. That's when I saw it. A few hundred yards away, partially hidden by a tangle of overgrown ivy and low-hanging branches, a group of men moved in synchronized, mechanical precision. They were dressed in simple, dark clothing, their heads bowed, their movements slow and deliberate. In their gloved hands, they each carried long black bags, the thick, shiny plastic reflecting the moonlight as they moved single file across the lawn. I ducked behind a massive, moss-covered statue, my pulse pounding in my ears as I watched them reach a small, square hatch set into the ground. It was almost invisible beneath the thick, twisting roots of an ancient tree, its rusted metal edges blending seamlessly with the dark earth. One by one, the men dropped their bags beside the hatch, their movements smooth and silent, like the slow, synchronized turns of a ritual dance. One of the men knelt, his gloved fingers prying open the heavy iron door with a groan of rusted hinges. My breath caught in my throat as I watched him drag one of the bags to the edge of the hatch. He hesitated for a moment, his head tilting slightly as if listening to something only he could hear. Then with a slow, deliberate motion, he pushed the bag into the darkness below. The bag moved. I froze, my fingers digging into the cold, damp stone at my side. The black plastic twitched and flexed, a weak, shuddering motion like the dying thrash of a trapped animal. I felt a cold, twisting sensation deep in my gut as the man reached for the next bag, repeating the same slow, methodical process, his movements eerily calm, almost reverent. I felt my pulse hammering in my ears, my vision narrowing as I forced myself to breathe, to stay silent. I had to see more, to understand what was happening. As the last of the bags disappeared into the hatch, the men turned in unison, their eyes still cast downward, their steps perfectly synchronized as they melted back into the fog-covered lawn, vanishing into the darkness like shadows. I waited, my heart thundering in my chest, until the echoes of their footsteps faded into the night. Then, with shaking hands, I crept toward the hatch, my feet sinking into the damp, spongy earth as I crouched beside the gaping hole. The air rising from the darkness below was thick and damp, carrying the faint, cloying scent of mold and wet stone. I hesitated, my breath catching in my throat, before gripping the rusted metal edge and swinging my legs over the side, lowering myself into the darkness. My feet hit the damp, uneven floor of the tunnel below with a soft, echoing thud. I straightened slowly, the air around me thick and wet, my breaths coming in short, shallow gasps. That's when I felt it, a small, sharp object pressing against the toe of my shoe. I stepped back, the sound of plastic crackling beneath my foot echoing sharply through the tunnel. I looked down, my eyes adjusting to the weak, flickering light, and felt my stomach twist into a cold, hard knot. Scattered across the damp, mold-streaked floor were dozens of small, brightly colored children's shoes, tiny sneakers and sandals, their laces still carefully tied. Next to them, small, forgotten toys, a plastic dinosaur, a rusted metal truck, a doll with one glassy, unblinking eye, lay scattered among the cracked concrete and dripping walls. I felt bile rise in my throat, my pulse roaring in my ears as I stumbled back, my shoulders slamming against the cold, wet wall. I wasn't just in a tunnel, I was in something far darker, and I had just stepped into its jaws. I forced myself to breathe, each shallow inhale tasting of mold and damp rot. The air was thick, clinging to my throat like wet wool, each breath a reminder that I was somewhere I had no right to be. The narrow tunnel stretched out before me, its cracked concrete walls streaked with dark, oozing stains that shone wetly in the dim, flickering light. Rusted pipes snaked along the ceiling, dripping dark, brackish water that pooled in shallow depressions along the uneven floor. My footsteps echoed off the walls, the sound warped and distorted, as if the darkness itself were whispering back. I crept deeper, my fingers trailing along the rough, crumbling stone for balance, the dampness seeping into my skin. I passed more scattered shoes and tiny forgotten toys, the sight of them twisting my stomach into tight, painful knots. A small plastic fire truck, its red paint chipped and faded, rested against the wall beside a pair of tiny pink sneakers, their laces still neatly tied. I felt a cold, nauseating dread building in my chest, my pulse hammering in my ears as I rounded a sharp corner. The tunnel opened into a larger, brightly lit room, the sudden wash of harsh, white light blinding me for a moment. I blinked, my eyes adjusting to the sterile glow. The room was spotless, the walls lined with gleaming white tiles that stretched from floor to ceiling, reflecting the cold, fluorescent light with a painful intensity. It felt more like a laboratory than a basement, the air sharp and clinical, cutting through the damp, earthy stench of the tunnel like a blade. Then I saw them, industrial freezers, their sleek metal doors polished to a mirror shine, lined the far wall, each one humming quietly in the sterile silence. My heart thudded painfully against my ribs as I stumbled forward, my eyes fixed on the nearest freezer. A small white label stuck to the door caught my attention, the ink smudged but still legible. My hands shook as I reached for the handle, my fingertips numb and trembling. I hesitated, my breath catching in my throat as a cold, sweet, rotting odor wafted up from the faint crack along the freezer's door. I pulled it open. A blast of frigid air hit me, my skin prickling with goosebumps as I leaned in, my eyes struggling to focus against the harsh, sterile glare of the overhead lights. Inside, the shelves were lined with neatly packaged, vacuum-sealed slices of what looked disturbingly like raw, marbled meat, each cut arranged with almost surgical precision. My mind rebelled, refusing to make the connection, my thoughts slipping and sliding around the truth like oil on water. Then I saw the small, pale, human-looking finger, neatly sealed in plastic beside a stack of thinly sliced muscle, the bone still visible at the joint. Footsteps echoed down the tunnel behind me, heavy and deliberate, the sound of polished shoes on cold, wet stone. I slammed the freezer shut, my heart hammering in my chest, and turned, my pulse roaring in my ears as I stumbled back into the darkness, desperate to put as much distance as possible between myself and whatever the hell this place was. I stumbled back through the tunnel, my pulse a frantic, panicked drumbeat in my ears. The sharp, sour tang of stale, refrigerated air still clung to my clothes, the cold biting at my skin as I felt my way through the darkness. I couldn't stop seeing it. The pale, severed fingers sealed neatly in plastic, the thin slices of marbled flesh, the clinical perfection of it all. I forced myself to breathe, each rasping gasp echoing against the cold, wet stone. The tunnel twisted and turned, the flickering, exposed wires overhead, casting my shadow in grotesque, stretching shapes against the cracked walls. My heart pounded, each step a painful, desperate jolt, as I climbed back up through the rusted hatch, my hands shaking as I pushed the heavy metal cover back into place. I staggered onto the lawn, my feet slipping in the damp grass as I tried to compose myself, to quiet the frantic, gasping breaths that threatened to choke me. The mansion loomed ahead, its stone walls towering against the foggy night like the ribcage of a long-dead giant. I slipped back through the side door, the warm, perfumed air of the mansion hitting me like a slap. The sound of clinking glasses and low, murmured conversations drifted through the marble halls, the guests still locked in their slow, hypnotic dance beneath the flickering chandeliers. I forced myself to stand straight, to blend in, my mind spinning, my vision blurring at the edges as I moved through the crowd. Then I saw her. Oprah, standing near the entrance to the grand dining hall, her dark eyes locked onto me from across the room. Her smile was a slow, curling thing, spreading across her face with the smooth, practiced ease of a predator scenting fresh blood. I felt my stomach turn, bile rising in my throat as she stepped forward, her heels clicking softly against the polished marble, each step precise and measured. She stopped in front of me, her head tilting slightly, her gaze raking over me with a cold, knowing intensity. Her hand landed on my shoulder, firm and cold, her fingers curling just enough to hint at control, her polished nails pressing into my skin. "Are you having a good time?" she asked, her voice smooth, each word wrapped in a layer of dark, oily warmth. My throat tightened, my pulse a frantic, irregular staccato in my chest. I forced myself to nod, my head moving in slow, mechanical jerks, my mind still spinning with the cold, clinical horror of the freezers below. Her eyes gleamed, a flicker of something dark and ancient flaring in their depths as she leaned in, her lips brushing dangerously close to my ear. "Flesh meets flesh," she whispered, her breath warm and sweet, her voice a soft, predatory purr. "Isn't that the way of things? The strong devour the weak, the chosen ascend." She straightened, her fingers slipping from my shoulder, leaving the cold, ghostly imprint of her touch against my skin as she gestured toward the dining hall. I had no choice. I stepped through the wide, arched doors, my mind spinning as the rich, greasy scent of seared meat hit me, thick and cloying, coating my tongue and filling my lungs. The dining room was a cathedral of excess, the long polished table gleaming beneath the flicker of candlelight, each place setting a work of art. Servers moved in slow, deliberate patterns, their faces blank and glassy-eyed as they placed silver-domed dishes in front of the seated guests, each one lifting the covers in unison to reveal plates of perfectly arranged, thinly sliced meat. I watched, frozen, as the guests leaned in, their heads dipping in slow, synchronized movements, their teeth flashing in the candlelight as they took careful, reverent bites. Oprah stood at the head of the table, her dark eyes never leaving mine, her jaw moving slowly, rhythmically, her lips pulling back to reveal perfect white teeth as she chewed, each swallow a quiet, intimate ritual. I felt my pulse spike, my skin prickling with a cold, nauseating fear as I realized she was daring me to join them, to become one of them, to abandon whatever shred of humanity I had left. I turned, my legs moving before my mind had caught up, my footsteps a frantic, echoing beat against the polished floor as I bolted for the door, the cool night air hitting me like a wave as I stumbled out into the darkness. The fog swallowed me, the damp, clinging mist wrapping around my limbs as I crashed through the garden, my lungs burning, my throat raw with desperate, gasping breaths. I ran until my legs screamed in protest, until my chest felt like it would burst, until the shadow of the mansion had disappeared behind me and the fog had closed in around me, hiding me from the dark, predatory eyes that I knew were still watching. A pair of headlights appeared through the swirling mist, a distant, hopeful glow. I stumbled into the road, my arm raised, my mouth moving in soundless, frantic pleas as the taxi screeched to a halt beside me. I collapsed into the back seat, my heart still thundering in my chest, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. "Drive," I croaked, my voice breaking, my hands shaking as I clutched the edge of the worn, cracked leather seat. "Just drive." The driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror, his eyes narrowing slightly, but he said nothing as he hit the gas, the tires squealing against the wet asphalt as we sped into the fog-covered night. I didn't look back. I left Hollywood the next morning, the skyline shrinking in my rearview mirror as I pushed my beaten-up sedan through the winding, fog-shrouded mountain roads. I drove until the gas light flickered, until my hands stopped shaking, until the sun rose, bleeding pale orange across the jagged horizon. Now, I live in a small, nameless town tucked between miles of dense, whispering pines, where the cell reception is spotty and the nearest neighbor is a half-mile away. I keep the windows covered, the doors double-locked, my shotgun within arm's reach. Sometimes, in the deep, suffocating quiet of the forest, I hear whispers, the rustle of leaves, the creak of old branches, the slow, deliberate crackle of dead wood beneath unseen feet. I don't know if it's the wind or if they've found me. I keep my phone off, my face away from cameras, my name out of mouths. I tell myself I'm safe, that I escaped. But some nights, When the fog rolls in thick and the shadows creep close, I wonder if I really did. Because once you've looked into the eyes of her, you never truly stop being prey.